Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you are. My name is Malizia Mensah, and I will be moderating this session today with the remarkable Senator Paulette Senior. It's going to be a great conversation, but as always, we have to our acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also honor our ancestors, those who have toiled without compassion or compensation, and the elders and community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you, Senator, for joining us today, this early morning.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to see that so many people are choosing to join us this morning. So thank you, and look forward to our conversation this morning.
Yeah, so please introduce yourself.
Okay, all right. As I said, my name is Paulette Senior. I am a senator in the Canadian Senate. I have been at it now for almost 2 years. Prior to that, I worked in the charitable nonprofit sector, mostly within the gender equality justice space. I'm the former president CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation, which I led for about 7.5 years, an organization focused on raising funds and resources and creating partnerships across the country to fund the work of gender equality across gender-based violence, equal pay work, supporting on-the-ground organizations and shelters that provide safety for women and children and gender diverse folks, and economic development, entrepreneurial work for folks who are supporting women and families to develop their businesses. And then many other things. So we partnered with government and other community partners and organizations to do that work from coast to coast to coast. It was the pleasure and honor of my life to do that work. And prior to that, I headed up the YWCA Canada for about 11 years. That was also the honor of my work. In fact, I spent almost 25 years of my career within the YWCA family, where I worked with the local YWCA in Toronto for about 13 years, and then worked with YWCA Canada, leading that national movement, as I said, for 11 years. And that was also the honor of my life. It's these two organizations are incredible. Prior to that, I did a number of different things locally across the Greater Toronto area, where I worked with young people and families and did advocacy work, community development work. Uh, in my spare time, I was also a volunteer with the Black Action Defense Committee, where I did a lot of work in terms of addressing issues of violence and against Black youth in Toronto. So I was really raised by elders, really, who some are have gone on now, but others are still here, and emulated what they taught me and other young people at the time to really stand up for your community, to advocate for justice, and to do that with immense pride and to do that with confidence. And so I took my marching orders from them in terms of how my own career developed.
Right. And I actually have to say thank you because the Canadian Women Foundation, we're on the fourth year of them funding our program, the Sisters in Solidarity program, where
Ah.
I am the managing director for it. So that's like So exciting.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, and they're so great to work with, such a great
Mm,
organization.
yeah.
Um, I guess you kind of already stated what inspired you based on your elders and,
Mm.
what you've learned, but what inspired you to dedicate your life to gender equity and social justice?
The gender equity part came later. I have to admit, as I grew into my womanhood and started to see, the reality of what women face, not just personally, but systemically, that became a major part of my focus as well, but also intersecting that with race and other areas of inequity was really important to me to really fill out the social justice part of my work. What inspired me to get started at first was really noticing my own experience when I came to Canada from Jamaica, and as a child, and realized that it was automatically assumed, things were just assumed that I was dumb and that I wasn't deserving of being thought of as smart, that I was streamed into lower level grades. And when I left Jamaica, I was a student that was a high achiever. So, that really left me puzzled and trying to understand what is this place that I've come to that just doesn't see me, yet really treats me badly. And I didn't have the wherewithal to fight for myself, but what I did was really took those lessons in. I got help from unexpected areas in terms of other teachers who saw me and lifted me up, and I'm thankful for that. Because one of the things that we never forget are those teachers who treated us well, but we also never forget the ones who didn't, because of the impact they left on our lives. And so when I became a young mom, and was raising my son and had other friends who were raising their children, I thought to myself that, this can't happen to our kids. And indeed, it started to happen. So I would group together with others. I would, have meetings with the principal, talk about what we wanted in the schools, and set about making it happen, whether it was Black History Month, whether it was making sure they had curriculum in the library that reflected our kids, just really working at those things at the ground level while I was doing work, paid work, in similar areas. So advocating for parents and youth in the school system was a big part of that. And so that work continued for me. Also, taking our kids to African Heritage on Saturdays. Every Saturday morning we piled them up in the vehicles and took them to African Heritage so they could learn about their own roots and culture and be together as kids. Because in the school system, depending on where they lived, that togetherness was not there. So really helping them to really be proud of their heritage and supporting them in that endeavor. While as parents, we supported each other. So that was how we formed community. That was how we built community. And today I look at those young people now with their own families and their successes. And I think that had a lot to do with who they are now as adults, is that they've really taken up um, that whole way of being with their own families, with their own friends, with their how they themselves build community. That's something that they carry with them. So it's become generational now, and that's something that I look back on with some pride, but also happy that happened. So those were the beginnings for me. And I also did a lot of work in terms of volunteering on boards, whether it was Scarborough Black Education Organization, to address issues of inequity in education for our kids. Also was chair of the Malvern Family Resource Center. I was not even 30 years old and I was chairing a board, so just really applying what it is I believed in community, and doing that work while I was also developing my career. I never thought about it in a very conscious way that I was on this path, that really was leading me somewhere. I That was not something I thought about in steps, or the way that I see young people today really planning out their careers. I never thought of it that way. I was really following what I wanted in terms of my passion, what I wanted to see in terms of community, what I wanted to see in terms of changing systems, and bringing about greater justice for community, and not only the Black community of which I'm from, but for all communities. That I really carry this sense of social justice that was for everyone. And so that was really, really important to me.
Right.
And so, I would say, raising my son, co-raising the children in the community, being an example for them, also kind of led me into politics. I also ventured into running in elections in my community because I felt that passion for it, to represent it well, because I didn't think it was getting the best representation it should. So that was also a baton that I took on for a while. Uh, Really, really very character building process in terms of running. And it really built me in a way that I didn't expect, in terms of being able to address community issues in a way that represented folks, but also developing a backbone, for anything that came at me. And never thought I would need that later, but I sure did. And so that was really character building for me as well.
Right. I guess you're right. Like it's like your spirit was guiding you to this path that you are. Like you were saying, like in our generation, it's physical. We have to write everything down when we're not tapping
Hmm.
into our, what flow, what feels right, what's going with the path. And
Hmm.
you were taught resilience from when you were a kid, from when you came here, and now you're applying that as an adult. Like that's pretty cool to see, to hear. Like that's
Hmm.
like from your work with the Canadian Women's Foundation and the WYCA Canada, what lessons stand out about community leadership?
That's a great question. Leadership is a really popular topic. Lots of folks are talking about leadership. And, for me, it's really showing up. It's important to show up, because from day to day, we take on the work that we do, and we do it the best way we can. And but when you're taking on a leadership role, it's showing up at a different level, pretty much daily, and showing up in a way that says that you're there, but also that you're representing, you're standing up, you're being counted on, that you can be counted on, that you're accountable as well, that you are the one that's been selected, chosen to do this work, and that you believe that within yourself. And I didn't necessarily believe that every day, because when you live in a society or a system where you're dealing with issues around inequity, whether that be based on gender or race or nasty combination of the two, and dealing with how people see you, um, that can get to you. That can get to you. And sometimes the messages penetrate, and that penetration can cause you doubt where you say, I'm not the one, you know? So when I say showing up, it's showing up mentally, psychologically, not just physically. It's showing up and walking in that space as if you're the one occupying it and believing that. Because as a Black woman growing up in Canada, leading organizations like the YWCA, like Canadian Women's Fund, these are white women's organizations. I have no doubt about that. I'm clear on that. So what does that mean for me as a Black woman? Well, I grew up here, right? I grew up here. And one of the things that I had to learn, you talk about resilience, I had to learn that from the ground up. Um, and I had to learn about people, right? I had to understand and see them coming before they even knew they were coming, right? And so for me, it's being able to um, take up the space that I'm in, knowing that I'm the one selected to do this without a doubt, but also understand that there are others who don't necessarily agree with that. So some of the questions that would come my way, like, how did you get this job? When I walk into spaces, when I travel to this country, in parts known and unknown, and would be the only one that looked like me in those spaces, whether it was among leaders or among my peers within the YWC across the country. Um, that's something that I faced, so it really I had to learn how to occupy the space of leadership in a sense of deep belonging, um, and 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 grow into that belonging over time, such that I got to a place where, and I had to get to a place where um, there was no space that I would walk into that I didn't belong, and believe that to my core. No
Right.
space, no space in this country, right? So whether that was north, east, west, or south, that's something that you have to develop over time and walk into, not with overconfidence, but with a silent, deep confidence that cannot be taken away from you, right? And showing up like that
Mm.
every day.
Whether
So that's the leadership lesson that I had to learn and take on um, as a leader of these national women's organizations.
Wow. And you know what? And it's like it's kind of like it's interesting how it's like every Black woman, we have that story, like that feeling that, we know there's spaces where we know they don't really feel like we should belong. But you're right. Like, I think that's even a lesson that everybody can take in. It's like no matter what space you're in, whatever situation it is, you always have to have that sense of belonging, because we all deserve to be in any space that we choose to do where we need to be. And I think sometimes you forget. You really do forget. Um,
Yeah.
how can policies better support women-led families and marginalized communities?
Hmm. Well, I believe in policymaking.
Hmm.
I believe that part of driving change is making sure that we have the right policies in place that will fund the work that needs to be done. And that's why my current role at the Senate is sort of pivotal in that for me. But even prior to that, I took the role of advocacy and public policy very seriously. Um, Public policy drives a lot for folks who are on the margins, especially. but it's also been driving a lot for those who have been centered
Mm.
a lot, those who have been prosperous for years. So we have to understand that, I think. I think it's important to understand that the way things are have been created. They didn't just happen. And there are policies that drive fundamentally those who have advantage over others, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so I think it's important that we understand that if that is the case, then what is the policy change that we need to be driving, right? So when I think about, let's take gender as an example. Um, the systems that we have in place were not created by women, right? They weren't
Mhm.
made for us. And that's why gender inequity has been systemic. That's why gender-based violence is at an epidemic level in this country, right? That is why. Because when women are seen as less than, and when certain women are seen as even as lesser than others, right? That's what drives and keeps the inequity in place, that keeps systems that work against us in place. And that's why I think policy change is so important. First, you need to understand them. You need to understand who gains from them in the first place, but who has been the losers as a result of them, and work to change them. So childcare, I think, is a good example of that. It seems innocuous in terms of, one of those good, solid meat and potato kind of policies, except it hasn't been. Childcare has been a political hot potato for decades in this country.
Mm.
It's been a half a century fight and struggle for childcare, for a national childcare program. And that's a policy systems change work that I'm proud to have been a part of for the past, I don't know, 3 decades. Being part of organizations that have pushed childcare, national childcare in this country. The YWCA Canada was one of the leaders. There have been champions in this country that have fought for childcare that I was honored to work alongside over those years, such that we actually have gotten much closer now to, at least in policy, have national childcare. There needs to be work to keep it, one, to keep it, but two, to improve it, and to make it permanent. Um, but I think of those who have lost out because we didn't have childcare, national childcare. It's been women. It's been us carrying that load of taking care of making sure our kids are okay, having to choose between do we just stay at home because we can't afford childcare, because it's more economical to stay home with her kids, if that's the choice we have to make. Now, I never want to say it's not a good thing to stay home with your kids if that's a choice you make and you can afford to make it, right? But it's important that for those of us who um, want to work outside the home and want to pursue our careers and raise healthy children, that should not be a choice. That should be something that we invest in as a society. That helps both men and women and all parents to be able to thrive and to have our kids thrive. So the inequity of that really is because women have been seen not just as the child bearers, but the child raisers. And it's been very inequitable. So I think that's a good example why I think policy and policy making is not something small. It's
Right.
critical, and another example would be pay equity. That's been an endemic issue for decades. And again, when I talk about these big bucket issues, I don't forget that it is those who have been put to the margins that have been impacted the most. So we're talking about racialized folks, folks with varying abilities and disabilities, indigenous peoples, LGBTQI two plus folks, right? So I think it's important to understand that it's also been a stratified experience, and inequitable reality for many folks.
So as a vice chair of the G7 Equality Advisory Council, what global lessons can Canada learn?
I'm proud to be a part of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council. This past year has been an interesting experience, and I'm really proud to have worked alongside women from around the world in the Gender Equality Advisory Council as well. Um, it's my third go around for being on GIAC for short. I first served when Germany was the president of the G7, and was really proud to be a part of that process, and developing recommendations around how to address gender equality, with folks like Japan, the US, the UK, and also folks who are not a part, countries are not a part of the G7 were also around the table. Then I had the honor of being selected to be on the one for Italy last year, and meeting with folks there to do similar work. The the experience of being on the advisory council this year was a bit different because the Gender Equality Advisory Council was started in Canada by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, um, in I want to say 2018 was the first one, because as you may know, he was a champion for gender equality, and so that work was really important in how he saw the development of his government. Um, and so he convinced other G7 countries to work within that. So this year is the seventh year for
Mhm.
the council. Um, and the geopolitical reality that we're living in, and I don't know if I have to spell that out for folks, but we do have a neighbor to the south who sees the world very differently and acts very differently. Um, and and um, and having to deal with that reality, of trying to bring countries together on one page in terms of addressing gender equality in their respective countries. And as a G7, we didn't know how we were going to do that, understanding that reality. So what we did this year, instead of just coming up with where are we with gender equality, what are the gender equality priorities that we should be focused on that we did in prior years, what we did this year was we aligned the work that we would do with the themes of the G7 in
Oh,
light of the gender equality, in light of the geopolitical reality, and understanding the limitations that we would have this year, we aligned our work with the priorities. So a good example of one priority was what's happening with forest fires around the globe, right? We know what the reality is in Canada, that it's a huge issue, that every year thousands of people are displaced, they lose their homes, and they have to flee to safety. We see that in other countries as well. That's a reality. So we looked at each of these priorities as, from the perspective of gender, and
okay.
what is it that we need to think about if we look at it from that perspective? And so we had an Indigenous member of our council from Canada who talked about indigenous ways of fighting fires that they've been doing for centuries, for a long time, but and doing it successfully because that's their home. They understand how to do that, but often are ignored for the ways that it's done outside of their communities. And so we had a woman firefighter who talked about the ways that Indigenous people have addressed this issue. And so we were able to learn in ways and make recommendations around that, as well as what is it like for a woman to be fighting fires, and how what is her experience. And so one of the things she talked about was the equipment. The very suits they wear are not made for them. They're made for men.
Yeah, true.
And so that's not something that I ever thought about. And so being able to maneuver themselves in equipment and that wasn't made for them was something that just would just fly over our heads. And so she brought that reality to life for us so that we could actually make recommendations about indigenous ways of fighting, but also as women who are firefighters, and what's the best way to do that. So that's just a minute example of some of the things that we discussed. Of course, we discussed the economy. One of the most important topics we discussed as well was AI. That was one of the themes for the G7 this year. So what is the gender equity lens that we need to put on AI when we talk about AI? And so we know, that AI is here. It's not going away, right? And so how do we address issues of technological advancement? How do we address issues of the use of AI?
Mhm.
Um, what has been the experience of women who are being attacked online, for example, especially as leaders, especially as politicians? In Canada, we've certainly seen women leave office because of the unending attacks online, where AI is used to present them in nudity and falsely, you know. So we know the dangers of AI. We were also interested in making sure that because this is something we know is not going away, who needs to be at the table? Who needs to be included? Who needs to be developing
Mhm.
these tools, and who needs to be putting what are the guardrails that we need to be putting on AI to make sure that one, we are building awareness and education of the public around the current and developing use of AI.
Mhm.
Um, Two, that we understand what's been the experience of people using AI. We know, for example, that racialized folks, when the tools are being used by security forces, whether that be police or others, we know, particularly for racialized and Black folks, that has not been in our favor in terms of recognition images and so forth. But we also know that who puts in the data are the ones who are favored, right? And it hasn't been racialized folks. It hasn't been women. It
Right.
hasn't been people with disabilities. It's primarily been young white men, right?
Yeah.
So who puts that in? When you put that in, that's what you get out. And so, really talking about this from a pragmatic, practical perspective and making recommendations about what is the role of women and the policies around that needs to shape the way AI is being used and developed, but also understanding that this is not something that's going away. And I want to hasten to say I am not in any way anti-AI. I don't know enough about it to be anti-AI, right? I'm learning. But one of the things that we're doing at the Senate, I chair the Human Rights Committee, for example. And so one of the things that we're working on is how to looking at the various cross sections where AI intersect with our lives as Canadians. And so a good example of that would be how does AI impact human rights? That's not something that we think about, but
No.
it's a reality. And how's that happening in Canada, but also how's it happening in other places in the world? And understanding how that's happening, and then thinking also what are the guardrails we need to put in place around that. Right now, Canada has none. We're still thinking about what that looks like. I've been a part of initiative, well, not initiatives, but I've been able to go to the three AI hubs that the government has funded to understand the work around the development of AI and what the government has in mind. We're looking at the Senate. Many committees are looking at AI from different perspectives. On the For the Human Rights Committee, we're looking at it in terms of how it's impacting our rights, our human rights. So that's in terms of GIAC, though, the work I did with GIAC really led to this work for me. And so I'm really, really pleased to see how they're intersecting. But I'm a proud member of GIAC, and I probably will be a part of GIAC when the G7 is hosted by France next year.
And how has your experience in community work shaped your approach as a senator?
Think I just gave an example
Yeah.
of that, right? But let me widen that by saying the work I've done prior to being a senator is the work I'll continue to do as a senator. I'll just be doing differently in a different space. And so I'm committed to continuing my work around gender equity and social justice. It's what's led me to become chair of the Senate Human Rights Committee. So that will not change. I also sit on the Social Science Technology Committee that's chaired by Dr. Rosemary Moody, that folks may know, also a Black woman. So it's work that I love that I'm doing now. Um, and I don't mean to slight my former employers or organizations I work for, but I I I embrace the work of the Senate in a different way because what I don't have on my shoulders is responsibility of raising money. um,
Oh,
that I had to do with those organizations that I gladly did and did effectively. But that is not something I have to think about now. Now I can really think about, okay, so how can I use my voice and my privilege in this space to address issues that I've always been passionate about, that I've always worked at. But, so I will ask questions during question period. I will sit down with ministers and ask them about certain policies and push for policy change. I did that with the Minister for Women and Gender Equality earlier this year, and we've seen some really positive change there. For example, I I'm going to be asking questions of the minister around what's happening about the renewal of childcare, not legislation, but the childcare agreements with provinces and territories. I will be addressing, like this past week, in fact, tomorrow, December 6th, is the National Day of remembrance of the 14 women who were murdered at L'École Polytechnique in 1989. And so addressing gender-based violence is an ongoing commitment for me. And we know in Canada that every 48 hours, a woman is killed by her intimate partner. I mean, that is staggering. I would say 15 years ago, I used to say it's every 10 to 15 years, it was every 6 days. Now it's every 2 days.
mm. Oh my gosh.
That is why it's an epidemic,
Right.
you
And
know?
yeah, and sometimes you don't even think about it. But when I was working with the attorney general, that was what, I don't want to say how long, but a long ago, and it was definitely a serious issue like
Mhm.
that to be addressed. So I know that we acknowledge the fact that the gender-based violence is happening and it's changing and it's pretty much alarming. But what gives you hope in the fight to end gender-based violence,
A hard one for me.
right? Because
Because it's not getting better.
do you think maybe hmm, more community work should be out, like more organizations should start like I don't even know myself, to be honest.
I am not easily at a loss for words. Um, this one, it worries me. It worries me. Awareness has been raised.
Hmm. Hmm.
Funds have been invested.
Hmm.
What is it that we don't get about this? How are we caring for each other in this life that it continues to be that this violence become so impenetrable, so impenetrable. How do we get to this space? Um, I am I am disheartened. I'm really, really disheartened that women are living in fear of their lives in spaces where they should feel the safest.
And I have to say, last week I actually had a conversation with a friend, and I think we're normalizing violence because she was talking about her relationship with her partner and the way she kind of just slid in, like, he's hit her numerous times. And I'm so while she was talking and she was making it like a normal conversation, I was like, wait a minute, hold up. What? And then she's like, oh, it's because, we get in these arguments and this is something that happened. And I'm just like, when did this become normal? Like, this is not normal. This is not acceptable. And it was kind of like, even when I was speaking to her, it 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 didn't even register that it was an issue
Mhm.
because she feels that even though he did these things, oh, he still loves her. He still, takes care of her and, pays the bills, etc. And I was, when I got home, I can tell you I did not sleep because I was like, what? Because so I thought maybe you would have a different.
Yeah. I am not hopeless.
Mhm.
I'm just stumped as to where to put my hope.
Okay.
What I would love to see is the kinds of investments and initiatives that capture the attention of this country in such a way as we did with drunk driving, as we did with seatbelts,
Okay.
right? Those kinds of campaigns that made it socially unacceptable, not just criminally, but socially
Mhm.
unacceptable to lay your hand on someone else, control the life of someone else, to control the money of someone else.
Mhm.
Make it socially unacceptable that we're teaching our kids from the moment they start observing us how to treat each other with love and respect. You
Mhm.
know, that this it brings me to tears because why is this okay? And why are we silent? You know, why do we mind our own business when we
Hmm.
see this happening? So I'm not hopeless,
Mhm.
but I am disheartened.
Yeah, because we really don't know where this is gonna go and if it's gonna get worse, and it is getting worse. And why I just feel like humans in general right now are detached in the sense of they don't want to be involved. They don't want to have empathy. They just kind of, want to worry about like that whole sense of community, like because when my friend did say that to me, I was at the house right, like right away. But in general, that's not something that, a lot of people would even consider or do. So I think we as humans have to kind of start bringing back that human touch. And in order, if we don't have that human touch within us, I don't think that personally things will change. That's just how I feel.
Well, I don't think anything stays the same forever,
Okay, that's
right? Nothing stays the same forever. So let's not be hopeless.
okay.
Um, and there will be a rising. It's just what at what cost? That's what I worry about.
Okay.
Hmm.
That's a good way to look at it too. I appreciate that to change the dynamic because
Hmm.
sometimes we can always go to the negative. Um, which achievement, even though I know you said the Senate is where you feel right now, but which achievement or is there any other achievements or milestones has meant the most to you personally?
You know, well, Victor probably knows what I'm gonna say. Um, yeah, it's parenthood, it's motherhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's
Hmm.
beautiful.
Hmm.
And what advice would you give to young women and gender diverse leaders today?
Hmm. I love some of the forward-thinking conversations that I hear younger people having. I guess I'm now, I'm accepting and growing into this title of being an elder because Victor calls me an elder. So I am an elder. But I'm embracing that. And I remember when I wasn't an elder and I really uh, looked up and learned from my elders. But it wasn't just about that. It was what do I take forward?
Mhm.
How do I utilize this learning to take forward based on what I see my path is, right?
Okay.
So when I think of, I can talk about the late great Dudley Laws. I could talk about the late Charles Roach. I could talk about Dr. Rakul Benjamin. These these are some of my elders that taught me so much. Um, and when I would walk into spaces of um, power, uh, I carry them with me. I carry their teachings with me, the lessons that they probably didn't even know they were teaching with me, you know? And so I saw my job as taking it farther than they did, as occupying these spaces that they probably never did, right? Like being in the Senate is one of those spaces.
Yeah.
Heading up some national women's organization is one of those spaces, right? But it's not just doing that. It's not just that achievement. It's how I did that.
Right.
You can't just say I want to be a CEO. I don't think you should just say, I want to be a senator. Is how will you take that on? How will
Mm.
you take up that space? What will you accomplish with that? The accomplishment is not the title, it's
Right.
what you do with it.
So it's putting in the work and like, do you mean like that pathway? It's not just the title, it's kind of like
Huh.
building character, building that experience and understanding that like that end role or what your end goal is, I guess for the younger generation.
Oh, probably. Um, but I think it's that you're carrying your full self into that role and you're making the role um, bigger than yourself and bigger than the title. Like you're making impact. You're creating something bigger than you know it to be, right? So that when you leave, you're leaving it um, that impact intact for someone else to take it and build it even farther. And that's what I think my role is when it comes to younger leaders that are coming up. It's please make do better than me. That's not the end goal.
Yeah.
Don't strive to be me. Be better than me. Rise higher than me. I think that's what we should be encouraging young people. Like, what is it that I did that I didn't do well? That you can do better. You can transform. Um, I think that's important because as human beings doing these big things, we're fallible.
Mhm.
We have faults, right? And that's being human. And but those faults will lead us to making mistakes, to probably not taking it to the places that we should, for being fearful, whatever, right? And I look forward to young leaders conquering those obstacles that maybe I faced or maybe that stopped me at a certain point and taking it even farther. I look forward to that. So um, maybe I can be an inspiration, but don't stop at me because bigger and better is out there.
Right. That
Hmm.
that's actually a beautiful way to close. Uh, Paulette, I think that this was I just want to thank you for just being fully transparent, being honest, and having this great conversation. And it's interesting. Certain leaders that are here that come onto this panel, you can actually feel, even though it's Zoom, you can actually feel their passion through their experiences and how they speak and how like the type of work that you guys are doing. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the remarkable work you're doing. I am going to take one thing from you that I have to be hopeful. And that's something I'm definitely going to keep in my mind because it times it's hard to see that glimmer of light. And I just want to thank you for actually, opening my eyes to remember that. And thank you. We end as we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also honor our ancestors, those who have toiled without compassion or compensation, and the elders and community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you join us for the rest of the day. And thank you, Senator, for joining us
Ashe,
today.
ashe, ashe. Thank you.